Senator Mohamed, on debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Senators, I rise today to speak in support of Bill S-222, which proposes to extend the federal voting age from 18 to 16. Second reading debate is meant to center on the principle of the bill. The principle here is inclusion, plain and simple. First, I acknowledge the tireless work of Senator McPhedran on this issue. Whether one agrees or not, her persistence, grounded in research and conviction, has ensured that this question remains before us and that young Canadians are not excluded from a conversation that directly shapes their future. At its core, this debate asks a simple question: who do we trust to take part in our democracy? Democracy has never been static. It expands or it stagnates. Our history is one of widening inclusion. At key moments, Parliament has chosen to extend the vote beyond property, beyond gender, beyond race. In 1970, we lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, enfranchising more than 2 million Canadians. At the time, critics warned it was too much, too soon. History proved otherwise. Again and again, exclusion has been defended in the language of caution, arguments that rarely withstand scrutiny over time. We should not repeat the mistake here. Today, we face a similar moment, but with clearer evidence. Canadians aged 16 and 17 are not a marginal group. They are a significant cohort, entirely excluded from federal decision-making, despite living the longest with the consequences of our decisions. Extending the franchise is not simply administrative, it's principled. Those who will live the longest with the outcomes of our decisions should have a voice in shaping them. And those outcomes are real. Young Canadians are entering a labour market transformed by automation, navigating a housing crisis where prices far outpace incomes, and inheriting climate challenges that will define the coming decades. They're not passive observers. They are engaged, they're organizing, advocating, and speaking directly and clearly about the defining issues of our time. And yet, a paradox remains. Those with the greatest stake in the future have the least formal influence over it. Some ask whether 16-year-olds are ready to vote. It's a fair question, but it must be answered with evidence, not assumption. That evidence is clear. By age 16, individuals demonstrate decision-making capacity comparable to adults, particularly in reflective contexts like voting. Real-world experience supports this. In Austria, and my colleague had talked about international comparisons, which expanded their voting age 2 decades ago, turnout among 16 and 17-year-olds has matched or exceeded that of older first-time voters. In Scotland's 2014 referendum, turnout among this group was estimated at approximately 75%. These are not signs of immaturity, they are signs of engagement. Another concern is about civic knowledge. This is a concern, in my opinion, that is misplaced. Our system has never conditioned to the right of vote on knowledge. We don't test for knowledge. We do not test for civic literacy at 18, nor do we do that at 81. And gaps in political understanding exist in all age groups. If anything, 16 and 17-year-olds are better positioned than many others. They are actively studying civics in structured environments where engagement can be supported. If preparedness is the concern, the answer is not exclusion. It is participation when learning is most active. Others raise concern about influence. But influence is universal. It exists across all demographics, through families, communities, and media. We do not and we should not disqualify voters on the basis of influence. What we do know is that when young people vote, they strengthen democratic culture by increasing discussion within families and communities. We must also confront a practical reality. Turnout among Canadians aged 18 to 20 is significantly lower than among older voters. This is not because they're not engaged. It's because we introduce voting at a moment of enormous disruption in their lives. Think about it. They're coming out of school, they're looking for a job, they're looking for a home. They are transitioning into a new phase of life, and we're saying, here you go, here's a big responsibility. At 16, the opposite is true. Young people are still in stable environments where civic habits can form: school, family, community. And those habits matter because individuals who vote in their first eligible election are far more likely to remain engaged, voters throughout their lives. If we care about participation at 30, we must act at 16. There's also a question about fairness. 16-year-olds, and this is super important, 16-year-olds work, they pay taxes, and they contribute to our economy. In many cases, they can consent to medical treatment and take on significant responsibilities. We accept their contributions, yet we deny them a voice. Some argue that voting should align with the age of majority, but Canadian laws never relied on a single threshold. Rights and responsibilities are introduced at different stages. Voting is not a proxy for full legal adulthood. It's a democratic right that has evolved over time. What our current system does is simple. It sets a line at 18 without testing knowledge, capacity, or engagement. Once that line is crossed, the right is universal. We do not exclude older Canadians for declining capacity or others for lack of civic knowledge. Yet, we hold younger Canadians to a higher standard. That's not a principled distinction. It's a double standard. In Frank versus Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that the right to vote is fundamental. The burden, therefore, is not on young Canadians to prove they deserve the right to vote. It's on us to justify denying them the right to vote. And that justification just does not hold. Because when we speak of readiness, we're often speaking less about capacity and more about comfort, our comfort with who gets to participate and our comfort with what they might prioritize. But democracy is not designed to preserve our comfort. It's designed to reflect our citizens. And then there's the broader demographic reality. Canada is aging, and older Canadians vote at higher rates. That's their right, but a healthy democracy requires balance. Expanding the electorate will not diminish any voice. It would simply include those who are currently absent. We should also consider trust. When people are excluded from formal decision-making, trust erodes. Expanding the voting age will not solve that entirely, but it's a meaningful step toward a more inclusive and responsive system. Some ask, if 16, why not younger? But our laws already draw distinctions there. At 16, Canadians work, they pay taxes, they consent to medical care, and they begin driving. These are meaningful thresholds that reflect recognized responsibility. In other words, to equate a 16-year-old with a child is not a serious argument, it's a convenient one. Finally, what would this mean for provincial, territorial, and municipal elections? We don't know yet. In fact, many provinces and territories and municipalities have already begun this discussion, so we're kind of late to the table. All the more reason to send this to committee. My colleagues, Senator Carignan and Senator Dalphond, asked some really important questions, so let's tackle that. Is this a legitimate place for us to move this issue? It is legitimate for the Senate to weigh in, to catalyze, not command, knowing that the other place can assert its primacy. Especially important that the Chamber nudges on issues of public interest. Sending this to committee will allow expert evidence before the bill moves forward. It's precisely because we do not face re-election, it's another reason, it's precisely because we do not face re-election that the Senate can move this issue forward as, quote, an honest broker. Last, why don't we just prime the pump? As they say, introduce, debate, study with expert advice, send it over to the Commons, which will then have the final say. In terms of polling data, in terms of other types of data, that's where committee review comes in. That will provide the opportunity to answer some of those unanswered questions. Honourable Senators, we are not being asked to speculate. We're being asked to investigate. And this is precisely why we should take the next step and send Bill S-222 to committee. The Senate has the constitutional right to move this type of bill. So the principle before us is simple. Those who are governed should have a voice in their government. 16 and 17-year-olds are not asking for special treatment. They're asking to be included in a system that already shapes their lives. They're already contributing to our economy, our communities, and our public discourse. The question is not whether they are ready for democracy. It's whether our democracy is ready for them. If we believe in inclusion, in evidence, in long-term strength of our institutions, then the choice is clear. I hope you will join me and choose a stronger, more representative democracy and send this to committee. And with that, colleagues, I call the question.
Senator Batters, you have a question?
I do.
Senator Mohamed, will you take a question?
I'm sure your question will be an important one. I think after 8 years of debate in this chamber over multiple parliament, I think that...
Senator Mohamed? You're not taking any questions?
Thank you. I'll defer them to committee.